Okay. So once again, thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Brooke Oliveri, I'm the manager of the Long Island Health Collaborative, and I would like to welcome you to our second Walk Safe Long Island Town Hall. So this event is sponsored by both the Collaborative and the New York Coalition for Transportation Safety. Together, we are making an effort to improve conditions for pedestrians and cyclists and really everyone on the road through law-based educational programming, of which this town hall is a part. So today, the town hall is going to focus a lot on micromobility devices and their role in the current state of transportation and the future of it. So just to kind of give you a few facts and some reasons as to why we chose that topic. So the first 6 months of 2021, believe it or not, they were some of the most deadliest for roadway users in over 10 years. During this time, the popularity of micromobility devices like electric scooters that surged. And in addition, from 2014 to 18, the number of injuries related to those scooters, it increased by over 200%. So one can only imagine that that has increased in recent years. Motorcycle fatalities have also jumped quite drastically. And a really kind of startling stat, nearly a third of the injuries that occurred on these devices results in head trauma. And believe it or not, some of these vehicles that go up to, 25, 30 miles an hour, they do require the use of helmets, but those injuries are still occurring. So we feel this is a really important topic to be discussing this evening. So before I hand it over to the experts, I am going to introduce them. So first up, we have Cindy Brown. She is the executive director at the New York Coalition for Transportation Safety, which I have a feeling a lot of you already knew. We're also joined by Daniel Flanzig, bike crash attorney and board member for the New York Bicycling Coalition. He is a cyclist himself, as you can see from that photo, and a really well-known advocate for pedestrian and bike safety. So we're very excited to have him on the panel this evening. And we're also joined by Mark Hoffacker, program director at the New York Coalition for Transportation Safety. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to our experts.
All right, we're going to talk tonight about micromobility because it is such a coming thing. And there's very little legislation, there's very little knowledge, that it just sort of is exploding all over the place. So we want to first of all define what we consider to be micromobility. Before we even got on this today, we couldn't decide whether it was one word or two. And according to the United Kingdom's dictionary, it's one. So, but it refers to small, lightweight vehicles driven at speeds between approximately 15.5 miles an hour. They're relatively new types of motorized transportation whose use in New York on New York State highways, roadways, was only legalized in 2020. During the course of this, and actually, just as an aside, one of the reasons that it was legalized is because many people who are food deliverers and messengers and whatever use these devices as a part of their work. And before the vehicles were legal, they could be confiscated. So during the course of this presentation, you're going to be introduced to several types of these devices that are currently on the road and considered to be micromobility devices. You'll see what they look like, where they can be used, learn about existing laws pertaining to them, and advised of the pros and cons related to their use. Our concern as a transportation safety organization is the impact they're going to have on other roadway users, especially pedestrians. We are concerned about the lack of regulation. The law that was passed is really basically just to allow their use. It doesn't really govern much else about them, and it's very confusing, and there are so many different types of these devices that it's difficult to really understand and enforce. So there also a problem with many of these people who ride these vehicles because they don't really obey the current traffic safety laws, whether it's deliberate or whether they're just ignorance of the law. but they kind of tend to ride where they feel like riding, and especially if they're delivery people, where it's quickest and most convenient. We hope that you'll watch, you'll listen, and you'll comment on the information. We're going to stop at various places for your comments. There are devices. These devices are proliferating at such a rate. I don't even, if you were to, there's at the end of this, you'll see resources, and one of them is called the Micromobility Newsletter, and it's published weekly on a Tuesday. It's international, and if you ever or never thought that these would happen, you only have to read this newsletter. But right now, the leaders in this industry are the manufacturers of these devices, not those of us who need to bear the brunt of these devices, really. So how do we safely integrate yet another contender for our limited roadway space? That's really the question. That's what we're going to try to talk about tonight. Next. All right, what does micromobility look like? Even the word itself of what constitutes micromobility is questionable. There are so many different kinds. As noted, micromobility refers to a small, lightweight vehicle, generally driven at speeds around 15 miles an hour. This type of transportation is designed to replace short car trips with a more eco-friendly option while addressing other challenges such as traffic congestion. Micromobility also offers firsthand first and last mile solutions. It helps to reduce the distance between a traveler's origin and destination and the nearest transit stop. For example, if you were now walking or if you were taking your car, your train station to the car, and then having to look for parking and do all the others. These devices, because they don't travel that far before they're all battery operated, and they're limited on the distance they could travel before the battery dies, but they can all travel 2 or 3 miles in either direction. So all of, as I noted, they're all battery operated, they're electric powered, and they are absolutely soundless. So here are some examples of the most commonly used type of micromobility devices, beginning with e-scooters. The one to the right here is one that you've probably seen many, many, many people use, and in particular, probably children. And they're very inexpensive, and they can be purchased for a starting price as low as $300. That would be, I'm not promoting them, but Target or Walmart advertises them at that price. An e-scooter can be used seated or standing. This one is strictly standing. They don't require any license, and they may be used in bike lanes, including bridges. Next. Now, these two are considered e-bikes. One is totally battery powered, and the other one is a pedal assist. So in other words, you still have to pedal, but you get some power from the battery. The New York Times did a whole article on this about a year ago by someone who actually is a bicycle rider and who was very dubious about the use of it, but who said after he wrote it, it was great. So I'm assuming that he is not the only one that felt that way. And they are proliferating, and these are considerably more expensive than the scooters, but again, a huge, huge range in price. No license or registration is needed. You can use them in bike lanes, despite the fact that the totally electric bike can really go about 30, 35 miles an hour. And they're also allowed on bridges. You might recall that last week, the sit down on scooters were banned from the bridges in New York City because they really go too fast. Next. All right, now this is where it gets complicated. And when Dan talks to you, he's going to give you a much better idea of how law pertains to these different vehicles. But these are, I'm going to call them mopeds, even though they're often referred to as sit-down scooters. It just makes it easier for me to differentiate so that you know what I'm talking about. but they're different classes. And this is a Class C, and they really don't look much different from class to class, but this one only goes 20 miles an hour. It can have 2 or 3 wheels. The user must have a driver's license, and the vehicle must be registered with New York State DMV. It can be ridden in the right lane or on a shoulder, and it's recommended that a helmet be used. The Class B mopeds, which are low speed also, 30 miles an hour, which is not so low speed because in New York City, the speed limit is 25 miles an hour. They can have 2 or 3 wheels again. The user has to have a driver's license and the vehicle must be registered with DMV. They can be ridden in the right lane or on the shoulder. Helmet is again required by law, but think about it. It can go 30 miles an hour. The cars alongside of you might only be doing 25. So they're in a lane where pedestrians could be walking and people on regular bikes are riding. And often if you're in the city, that's a protected bike lane. There aren't necessarily a lot of protected bike lanes on Long Island, but again, they are designated bike lanes, and these vehicles can travel at a much greater speed than a regular bike or a pedestrian. Now, a Class A moped, excuse me, is still considered low speed, even though it's 40 miles an hour, and it can have, again, 2 or 3 wheels. You have to have a driver's license, and the vehicle must be registered with DMV. There's no mention here of insurance. You must use vehicular lanes with this one. It cannot ride in the bike lane, and by law, you must wear a helmet, like a motorcycle. Okay, next.
So now that we've gone through the different types of micromobility devices, we have a few questions for you. I'm going to launch the polling here. So we have 3 questions for you. Under the first, you'll see for choice 3, that should be somewhat. So if you feel that the best answer would be somewhat, please choose choice 3. Can everyone see the polls?
Yes.
Okay.
Great, thank you. So the first, we're just wondering, do you own or regularly use an e-bike, an e-scooter, or any other micromobility device? We also would like to know if you see these types of vehicles in your area. And if yes, what kinds do you see on the streets there? So I'm just going to give it a little more time.
And it'd be okay, right? If somebody has a question specifically on what's a moped, what's a scooter, or
Oh, sure, please.
we're going to get into it a little bit more, but if so far you have a question, just ask.
Okay, 12 out of 20. I'm just going to give it 20 more seconds. So if you haven't answered, please do. Okay, I'm going to close out the polling here. Thank you, everyone, for your responses. And just to share the results. So a lot of you had said no, that you don't either own or regularly use these devices, but you have seen them in your area, and a lot of you are seeing these e-bikes. So that's great to know. Thank you. And I'm sure we'll discuss that a little more as we move on here.
All right, we're going to talk a little bit about, excuse me, the advantages of micromobility, because obviously the manufacturers of these devices are quite thrilled with them. And as a matter of fact, when some of the manufacturers who came into the city to become the people who would rent these to you, they did not go to the city government initially. They actually went into the suburbs, into the outer parts of Queens and Brooklyn, where they thought people would be more agreeable to using these kinds of devices. And they did demonstrations at different areas so people could see how helpful they might be. Because if you go into Southeastern Queens, you're nowhere near a subway. So people use dollar bands and different things to get around. Now they would be able to rent one of these for a couple of dollars and go the 2 miles and do it on their own time. So we're going to talk a little bit about the advantages. They would make for less cars on the road. 30% of riders used e-scooters to replace car rides on their most recent trips. They produce way less CO2 emissions because they're electric. And they would replace the car commute with the micromobile travel. And the method saves up to 200 kilograms of CO2 annually. It's a shortened commute time, as I just noted, because it's on you and you can go back and forth quickly. You reach your destination faster by speeding up your travel time from the nearest public transit stop. They're relatively inexpensive to use and they can be rented by trip or by month. Excuse me. Next. And here we have the disadvantages. The first one is safety. There were 41 deaths in 219, and most were 2 vehicle crashes involving automobiles on these devices. E-scooters were the most dangerous, and male riders crashed more than female riders. There's a significant lack of training for people who rent or purchase these. In fact, there's almost none. I understand that one of the manufacturers has a quiz that they ask you to take, or a questionnaire before you can rent their device, but it just basically asks you if you know how to start it. I don't know. This may be at least partly responsible for the deaths and injuries that are occurring, especially among inexperienced drivers. Mopeds must be registered with DMV, but registration is not always enforced. In other words, you would have to be stopped on the street to see if you actually have a registration. So unless a police officer stops you, there's nobody to enforce, you're going and renting one of these things at like City Bike, at a bus stop or a train station and using it, because there's nobody at the point of purchase who checks to see whether or not you are registered. There are restrictions as to where these scooters can be ridden. They cannot use bicycle lanes or sidewalks if they go over the ones that go over 40 miles an hour. None of them should be ridden on sidewalks whatsoever. All micromobility devices are battery operated, so they make no sound. Unlike gasoline-powered vehicles of this nature, pedestrians or other non-motorized cyclists cannot hear them coming. Frequently, riders of these devices disregard traffic regulations. As I noted before with delivery people and whatever, they're anxious to do their business and deliver their product. So if it requires going up a one-way street, they will go up a one-way street. They'll not stay in lanes. They'll crisscross traffic, and that's a hazard. So making them dangerous, it particularly makes them dangerous to pedestrians who are trying to cross the street, because if you don't hear a vehicle coming and you expect traffic to be coming from your right, and this person or rider comes from your left, you're not even looking in that direction. If they don't have a horn or a way of indicating to you that they're there, you will never see them. The vehicles also require parking, which may be extremely limited in congested areas. I don't know if there's anybody on the phone now who is in Manhattan who could talk to whether or not these bikes are confiscated once they're laid on sidewalks. I know there's a big problem with theft, but many rental scooters are frequently left on the sidewalks, and they again become an obstruction to people who are trying to walk. Next. I think Dan, who is our resident lawyer and bicycle expert person, will talk a little bit about the laws of that exist regarding these types of vehicles.
Yeah. Want me to start, Cindy?
Yep.
Okay, guys. So thank you for having me. It's a very interesting area of law because the legislator in New York is always very slow to keep up with the most common things that occur in our lives. This is happening at an incredibly rapid rate, and the ability to pass laws that are both relevant, capture the real need of safety, and controlling riders and making the streets safe is way behind the rate at which these vehicles are coming out. For instance, I've been involved with the New York Bicycling Coalition for about, I think now going almost close to 9 years, 10 years. When I first joined that board, we were working on trying to get e-bikes legalized in New York State. At that point, it was really, like Cindy said, it's really the industry. A lot of the e-bike makers and motor makers like as Bosch, they were all working in lobbying to get these laws passed. It wasn't until, like Cindy said, where really there was an issue involving the seizure of these bikes from delivery people, that New York City got on board, and that was able to help get this thing passed statewide. And again, e-bikes were not something that was new or novel. They existed in Europe forever. They were used regularly throughout the rest of the country and the rest of the world, but New York State had a really, really hard time catching up. Full disclosure for me, I own 2 e-bikes. One is a cargo assist, a cargo bike pedal assist. I use that every single morning to take my kids to school. I have another one that I bought for my wife some time ago, simple throttle bike. And I own a stand-up scooter because I just wanted to see what those were all about and try those out amongst, embarrassed to say, some 9 other bikes. My family says I'm not allowed to buy anymore. 2 are in my office at the moment, 2 vintage bikes. I ran out of room at home. But I love my e-bike, and anybody who's ever got on one really understands the beauty of it. It is not a motorcycle. It is something that just basically gives you this ability to ride. Sometimes when you're tired, gives people access who don't have the physical capability of riding, and they're just fun. That's the bottom line. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, so we start with the first premise that e-bikes and e-scooters, we'll talk about them both together for the moment, under Vehicle and Traffic Law 1281. Like bikes and e-bikes, e-scooters are subject to all the rights and responsibilities of a driver of a vehicle, unless explicitly set forth in new statutes. And I can tell you, when I first saw the new e-bike and e-scooter statutes, I could tell you, I spent maybe 3 hours trying to decipher it. And every time I go back, even preparing for tonight's lecture, I still have to relearn it and try to understand it again. It's incredibly convoluted, really poorly written. But anyway, right now, this is what we have. We have 3 classes of e-bikes under Vehicle and Traffic Law 102C. Class 1, it's an electric assist bike. So if anybody's ever ridden a city bike, electric assist bike, it is an assist. It does not have a throttle. As you pedal, the motor will assist you in riding the bike. Then go to class 2, throttle bike. This is something more similar to what we see with the delivery men and women. And this has the pedal assist, but it also has a throttle. So you don't need to pedal to make the motor operate. You can just push the button. This is something I'm still trying to have a hard time understanding where it stands in the rest of the state, but we have class 3. This is only defined and legalized, apparently, from this law within the city of New York. I'm sorry, within the city of New York, because it's the only city really in the state that has a population of more than 1 million. So that's a throttle bike. And that's a throttle bike that's capable of existing speeds of up to 25 miles an hour. It's important because this comes into a lot of insurance issues. Vehicle and Traffic Law 125, as amended, the new law, e-bikes are not motor vehicles for the purposes of the Vehicle and Traffic Law. For purposes of insurance claims, they're not motor vehicles. They have been given their own definition under VTL 102C. Looking more at e-bikes, class 3, the 25-mile-an-hour bike, that requires a helmet for all riders, mandatory, whether or not age. First time we've seen that statewide. E-bikes are required to have the motor disengage when you apply the brakes. No person under the age of 16 may operate an e-bike. And I see a lot of kids I know in my neighborhood riding them. They cannot be ridden on a sidewalk. And what's different about this is in New York City, you can't ride a bike on the sidewalk. I believe in Long Beach and some other municipalities around the state, you cannot ride a bike on those municipal sidewalks. But statewide, there's no prohibition against riding a bike on a sidewalk. Here, for the first time, we see e-bikes straight out can't be ridden on sidewalks. In terms of defining these classes, the manufacturers are now required to actually have markings on the bike demonstrating their max speed and wattage. So when we look at the class 1 and class 2s, those are typically 750 watt bikes with a max speed of 20 miles an hour. That needs to be actually on the bike and marked on it. And there was a big issue before this all became legalized in the city of New York. Not only was the city of New York seizing the bikes of riders, but they were actually going into the shops that were selling them and seizing the bikes of the shop owners. So, this marking thing is really important in terms of shop owners. And I'm telling you, those in the city of New York, you're seeing them pop up all over the place. Scooter shops are taking over a lot of post-pandemic empty storefronts, and they're using that space to sell these bikes now. E-bikes, different than a regular manually operated bike. It's illegal to operate an e-bike while you're intoxicated on or impaired on drugs. Believe it or not, you can ride a bike intoxicated anywhere but Suffolk County apparently now, but throughout the rest of the state. So e-bikes for the first time, we're looking at that. And then looking at the e-scooters is, what we describe as stand-up. Again, they have been given their own definition, amending the vehicle and traffic law. They're now defined under VTL 1114E. This one is incredible because we see so many children riding these things. In my own neighborhood, we do, but actually it's illegal for any child under the age of 16 to ride an e-scooter. Helmets are required for anybody because you can't over the age of 16 who's riding them. So 16 and 17, they're required to have helmets. They may not be operated on highways with a posted speed limit of 30 miles per hour or less. Same with e-bikes, by the way. I didn't add that in there. May not be operated at speeds greater than 15 miles an hour, so they're limited to that. Cannot be parked on sidewalks, same as an e-bike. Cannot be operated on public lands or property. That's in the e-bike regulation as well. Big issue with regard to places like the West Side Highway. There are signs posted all up and down the West Side Highway that e-bikes and e-scooters cannot be ridden there. I went for a run along the West Side Highway on Sunday, and they were zipping along there. So I don't think it's really being enforced.
But Dan, can I ask you, because I'm, so like Massapequa Preserve, where there's a really nice, bike lane, but that's public land, isn't it? So you can't have an e-scooter or an e-bike?
According to this, when I read the statute, yeah.
Wow.
Without any public land or property.
Right.
What they did in the statute is they made these really large carve-outs, allowing local municipalities, counties, and towns and villages to create their own legislation with regard to where and how they can be ridden. So any local municipality doesn't have to go back to Albany like they would do if they had to change the speed limit. They can make their own rules and regulations with regard to where they can operate. Similar to bikes, it cannot cling onto vehicles. Similar to bicycles, must have lights half hour after sunset, half hour before sunrise. Same with an e-bike. And also e-scooters cannot be operated or impaired on drugs. Two other things I looked at. This was interesting. So Vehicle and Traffic Law 1234 defines where a bike needs to be ridden upon the roadway. And typically you're supposed to ride along the right-hand side of the shoulder. You can ride more than two abreast if you're not impeding the flow of traffic. E-bikes always have to be ridden in single file. You can never ride them two abreast. Class 1 and Class 2, although they're defined by speed, they also cannot be operated above 20 miles an hour. So let's say you're on a hill, right? And you could easily get above 20 miles an hour by just coasting down the hill. According to the statute, it'd be unlawful to ride your Class 1 or 2 e-bike in excess of 20 miles an hour. Class 3, same thing, you can't do it, but now you can't do it in excess of 25 miles per hour. And similar to a bicycle, I don't know if a lot of you know this, but you're not allowed to let a child under the age of 1 ride on a bicycle. And the same law applies to e-bikes as well. All right. Moving over to Class B mopeds. And when I think about Class B mopeds, I think about Revel and now recently released Lime e-bikes. And for those of you who are not aware of the program, Revel is pretty prevalent now throughout most of the city. Lime is a little bit more limited and they're a little bit more in the outer boroughs. But these are companies that basically drop scooters on streets, and very unlike City Bike, who spent a lot of time working with DOT and coming up with an organized plan of how they're going to be introduced to New York City. Revel said, we're here, we dropped them on the streets, go download our app and go take it for a ride. And I guess it's now last summer was horrific. There were people ending up in the hospital, some high profile deaths, one of a CBS News reporter. When that happened, it came to a grinding stop. DOT said, no, you guys got to just figure out what the heck you're doing here. And they pulled them off the street, and Revel came back with a plan of you need to do a certain type of test before you can operate it. So they give you a number of quizzes. You have to a number of questions on a quiz. If you get a certain number of questions correct, you can unlock the app and use the device. Revel, you have to upload your driver's license, and they do a quick background check. And once that's done, you're good to ride. Question I always have is, just because my brother has a driver's license and he downloaded the app, how does Revel control who's riding, right? Because just the person who has the app doesn't have a special key. They can just unlock it and somebody else can get on board. So that's one issue. I spent some time before we did this tonight just to learn a little bit more about Lime. And according to their program, their website, they have a similar program than Revel. You need to take one of their classes before you can ride a Lime scooter. What are these devices? These are Class B mopeds. They require a driver's license, they require registration, and they require insurance. They are limited to where they should be ridden. So like Cindy had mentioned some of the things about where they go. There is very little legislation in New York right now about it. So on October 28th, this month, they're going to have a open legislative hearing in New York City about basically having increased legislation on these devices, who can ride them and where can they be ridden. Right now, they can't be ridden on bridges. They are not supposed to be ridden in bike lanes. I don't know or have seen a statute that prohibits their use. Motor vehicles are not supposed to be in bike lanes, so I would think that would be the best argument. Doesn't say specifically Class B mopeds, but they are considered a motor vehicle or a moped. They shouldn't be in bike lanes. They can't be on highways. They can't be on bridges. One of my big issues,
there is, you're talking a lot about the boroughs, right?
Yeah.
So as far as I know, we have bike share on Long Island, but just regular bikes, the pedal share. There are no like e-scooters or e-bike share program currently on Long Island, right?
No, I know it's Lime had tried to do something in the suburbs, but they did it in upstate New York.
Okay.
The electric bikes that they had in the Rockaways. But I'm not aware of any electric assist devices in Long Island. They all seem to be in the city of New York.
They would be privately owned. There's just no share program. Right?
Exactly. And the share programs that do exist here, I don't think any of them have moved over to electric devices.
No, I don't think so. Yeah.
The reason, and it makes sense, they require more maintenance. They have to be pulled off the street. They have to be charged. So they're a lot more work. So when you have a confined area like New York City, one truck can service, 100 bikes. But, as to pedestrians in these devices, because I see a lot of crashes involving Revel scooters and pedestrians and Revel scooters and bicyclists, because they are sharing some pretty limited space. If you're a pedestrian struck by a Revel, you do get no-fault insurance. So for those of you who do not know, no-fault insurance is insurance that's going to cover your medical expenses and lost wages up to $50,000 if you're involved in a crash. Revel provides that coverage to pedestrians or cyclists that are struck. You also have a right to bring a third-party action against Revel for those injuries you sustained in the crash. But Revel, and I don't know about Lime, but I assume it's the same, is only going to provide up to $25,000 state minimum insurance coverage. So God forbid you have a real serious injury, you're pretty limited as to what the responsible operator is going to have to cover for that. If you're a passenger or the operator of Revel, you do not get no fault. And one of the killers here, and I've been dealing with this now for over a year, we all download these apps and we enter into these agreements. It says, click here, right? I agree to terms of use. And very little of us ever spend some time to scroll through the 97 pages of terms of use. Well, both Revel and I looked again today at Lime, if you're a single user, you're involved in a crash on a Revel, let's say the brakes failed, falls apart underneath you, or any way that you're caused to be injured on their device, you agree to give up your right to sue them and are forced only to go to arbitration. You lose your right access to court. Lime has the same agreement. They're what they call click wrap agreements. And the old day used to unwrap software. And once you took the wrapping off your software, you kind of agreed to all the terms of use. Now the click is the wrap. So as soon as you do that, exists in Uber, exists in a lot of the platforms we're using. But you're signing a waiver, you're signing a release, a lot in there. So that's the other real insurance issue I see with regard to Revel and Lime. Let's just take a look at the next slide, because this was given out by New York City NYPD, and it kind of shows you how incredibly complicated this is. We're talking about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 devices alone, and all the different laws that apply to each one of those devices. And it's pretty complicated. So number one, I think it creates a lot of issues for law enforcement because it's a lot to know. And these things are not all, it's not like, it doesn't say class 1, I'm running a class 1, I'm running a class 2, I'm running a class 3. It really requires some examination. You can't tell by just passing the vehicle. Same with the mopeds, unless somebody's exceeding a speed limit of more than 40 miles an hour, you're not going to know it's a class A. So they're difficult laws to enforce, they're difficult laws to define, and they're difficult laws to uphold as a user and make sure you're riding them lawfully. And then we move over to the far right column. We have these other things floating around. A lot of sellers, especially in the outer boroughs, are selling electric. They're all kind of hybrids. I don't know what I not describe them. They look like mopeds, but maybe they're a motorcycle or maybe they're a bicycle. They're coming over from China. They're really hard to define, but they're illegal in New York City. Electric skateboards are illegal in New York City. Segways have been illegal for a long time. Hoverboards and the electronic unicycles, which are nuts. Those as well, although you're seeing them all over the city. But those things, I see them traveling like well in excess of 30, 40 miles an hour. They're crazy. But it's a lot to digest and a lot to learn. And believe it or not, I'm still learning it.
Yeah, and I just would make the point it's not much, but I'd say within the past 2 or 3 months, I've seen 2 Segways, on the sidewalks. One place was Bayport. You do see a few on Long Island, and here you have somebody, they're not really going that fast, but they're on the sidewalk, which is basically for pedestrians.
Yeah, for sure.
Next, are you done?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to make a few points, I guess, about infrastructure. We probably touched on some of these a little bit. Just first with bike lanes, you have 2 types of bike lanes, generally protected bike lanes, or a bike lane that's just paint on the streets. We don't have a lot of protected bike lanes on Long Island. You have some off-road bike lanes like 347. I live close to the Seafood Oyster Bay, that nice, bike lane that goes down to Jones Beach, Ocean Parkway. Here you're protected, you're a lot safer if you're using a regular bike, or if you happen to be using an e-bike, if off-road. They can be protected. There's Jersey barriers, Northern Boulevard, which is part of Queens, but that section of Flushing Bayside, they actually have the concrete to separate the bikes and cars. And, in Manhattan, there's different ways that they park their cars to create a protected bike lane. More common for Long Island are just like a painted bike lane. I think there's a lot in Suffolk County, in a sense, to me. They were just shoulders of a wide road, and all of a sudden they put a little paint down and put the icon. It became a bike lane. But like I said, they're kind of shoulders. If you're on an e-bike or possibly a stand-up e-scooter, I think this research, it shows one of the real safety issues is the quality of the road. So if I'm riding my regular bike, let's say I'm out in traffic, I'm riding to the right as far as I can go. Maybe I'm doing 8 miles an hour. Maybe if it's me, it's even slower. But if you're on an e-bike and you're doing 25 and you hit a nice big pothole, and we have a few of those, you could sustain a pretty serious injury. And in general, I think, I'm going to talk about sidewalks, but a point now just about bike lanes that I find, pretty true on Long Island is, if a bike lane is not provided, e-scooters or currently regular cyclists, so it's going to become e-scooters and e-bikes, they're almost compelled to take the sidewalk because there's such a lack of infrastructure of bike lanes. So sidewalks, I think, I know there's the law, Dan, and it's different, between the boroughs and, but generally, I think it's good for people to think of sidewalks as being for pedestrians and young kids who are riding, on bikes. I mean, that's the law in New York City. You have to be over the age of 14 to ride in the street. But I mean, think of sidewalks basically as for pedestrian young kids. So Cindy kind of mentioned, again, this probably wouldn't be so much on Long Island, but the share programs, especially the scooters, stand-up scooters, you use this app that, people are leaving them all over the sidewalks. Like that's just another tension that's being created. I mean, it could be e-scooters too. If you were to go into Elmhurst, where there's a lot of delivery people, they're parked up on the sidewalk. There's no real parking for them. So they're taking away that space from pedestrians, and you have to navigate around these things.
Yeah.
And the same thing on the sidewalk, if I mean, an e-bike on a sidewalk can be going pretty fast, and you're trying to walk, and what's a person's reaction time? Obviously, older people with disabilities are going to be a greater risk, if, people start using these more. The space for, my point is the space for pedestrians and cyclists, regular size, it's being encroached. I think in the boroughs there's a real influx of these, not so much on Long Island, but when, we will see an influx. I think they're a lot more common now than they, are in that Suffolk County. And it's going to be, sidewalk space is hard enough right now, I think, on parts of Long Island, because even the infrastructure, we do Walk with the Dock program a lot. There's poles, there's a lot of barriers just on the regular, sidewalk. So to have these micromobility devices being used and or parked or left, on our sidewalks is going to be hard. I think in terms of one of my own observations in terms of driving on Long Island is, I mean, I can usually recognize an e-bike, but I don't think a lot of drivers necessarily can. So I don't know if they adjust their reaction time. Maybe they're going to assume a cyclist is supposed to stop at the stop sign, which they're supposed to do by law. But if it's an e-bike, they don't stop at all. They're coming through a lot quicker, and so therefore the intersection, can get very tense. If you think, well, I just see a cyclist, but it's really an e-bike, they're, good chance that they're going to be, more aggressive. So
Mark,
go
I want
ahead.
to add one thing really quick. We didn't add it into the slide, but I had done a presentation about maybe 2 years ago on this stuff, and I spent some time looking at some health studies, and the majority of e-scooter crashes and injuries were really the result of infrastructure versus vehicles. And that's the bottom line. You look at them physically, right? There's, they're relatively unbalanced, small wheels. If you're going off a sidewalk, you're going over a speed bump, you're going over a pothole. All those things are going to be super dangerous. And that looks to be historically the number one cause of crashes on those devices.
Yeah, and I think somewhat related that probably deaths on scooters or stand-up scooters or even sit-down scooters, deaths are usually the result probably of an automobile.
Yes.
So it can be infrastructure, it can be automobile. I think we've made this point, but for me, just to restate it, because it's just one of my theories looking at traffic safety is, when I teach defensive driving, you talk about risk, and part of the definition of risk, well, how many road users are there? And so now you have more road users, we have new types of road users, and it's just so much, tension being, created because, we have these micro mobility devices. The lower, I don't know for the hope of infrastructure on Long Island when there's not much infrastructure for regular bikes. I give Long Island Railroad probably credit for, they've done a lot for bike parking. I could see them starting to look at what they could do for micromobility devices, because people, as Cindy mentioned, that last mile, to get to the train station. But if you're using an e-bike, well, where are you going to park it? Because it's a valuable thing to have. So and research shows that everybody's more unsafe around a train station or a bus terminal because people are rushing and there's, looking at their phones, they're late for the train, they're running across the street. So that would be a good start to look at some infrastructure there. It'd be nice, it's probably more common in Manhattan if companies provided bike parking, indoor bike parking, especially that would be good probably for e-bikes. Because again, there's some value to these. So if you could bring it inside and feel more secure, that would be helpful.
While you're on the subject of parking, I just want to point out we have a note in the chat from Allison, just pointing out that bike racks being on the sidewalks can be confusing. People sometimes start, where they stop and park. So I thought that was a good point.
Yeah, so all of the bike share program, regular bikes, share programs on Long Island, pedal share, that's a dock system where you can't leave your bike anywhere. You got to put it into the dock. There's a term on the lower left. I'll finish with this term of geofencing. I think it's a great potential, for micromobility. Geofencing is when the vehicle automatically senses and responds to local road conditions. So in other words, if I'm on an e-bike or a scooter, and if it does have geofencing, it's going to take in the speed limits, just like it's going to see what the local speed limit is. It's going to see where are the sidewalks, how many pedestrians are currently, using the road, and maybe possibly adjust, the speed. That would be a very nice technological support. In Paris, I got a note somewhere, like in Paris, some of the devices, probably the scooters, I don't know the exact hours, like between 11 p.m. and 4 a.m., they automatically slow down the speed because there's a lot of intoxicated people or darkness, visibility issues. So there is these manufacturers, I don't know that safety is their top priority right now, but maybe I think there could be some technological responses. I think we'll go next. I think if there are any questions now, either box, the first point I would, I thought it was really nice in the beginning of the pandemic where you saw a lot of municipalities, and it's true on Long Island, closing down the streets. That was sort of a boon for pedestrians and cyclists, but some of that's taken away. That space is unfortunately, I guess I would say unfortunately it's going to be given back to the cars. It'd be nice to see a lot of streets closed down, just made for pedestrians and cyclists. Any questions, suggestions?
Points
Just
for discussion?
Yeah, just a comment. It's Donna Glosser from AAA. I guess either Dan or Mark was saying, why aren't there helmet laws for all of these riders? I mean, I know on the rentals, I guess they can't have one there for sanitary reasons, but why aren't there helmet laws? There's, it's recommended on some and required on others.
Well, I'll put my 2 cents in is first of all, look at.
Dan, you're muted, just so you know.
Okay,
Trying to
so-
unmute
sorry.
you here.
Was
Yeah,
I? I wasn't.
No, you weren't, Don. Yeah, first of all, helmets, even on a regular bike, helmets aren't mandated,
I
for
know.
adults. And Donna, you probably know more than I do about the debate that motorcyclists have had, where they think helmets are not as, makes it more dangerous for them. So I guess it's just a continuation of that, discussion that people have.
can you force an adult to wear a helmet?
Right.
Or, do people get a sense that they have a helmet so they could go faster? And that's even more dangerous because they think they're protected. I mean, I think where you're going, and I would agree with you, because I think helmets are very effective in reducing the potential, possibility of a brain injury.
Right.
But I don't know if Dan has any.
Yeah, it's
terms
a
of-
great topic, Donna. And, there's a lot of studies that have been done about mandatory helmet use. And the reality is, from every study I've ever read, there isn't a lot of good data that shows it really limits injuries in bike crashes other than low speed crashes. And most of the fatalities are not low speed crashes, right? You're being hit by a car at 35, 40 miles an hour. It doesn't matter if you're wearing a helmet or an armored suit, you're going to die or be seriously injured. It's really going to only prevent some injuries in low speed, hitting a pothole, things like that. You balance that versus, what the studies have shown, people just won't ride if they have to walk around with a helmet. So
Right.
you have this public health issue of like, do you want to get people on bikes? And that's overall, I met a gentleman, I'll get a little off topic, but I met a gentleman, he's a physician, and he was trying to get a study done here in the US, taking the risks of riding a bike versus the overall health benefit. And it's like 10,000 times, the cardiovascular benefit and everything else. So the bottom line is, you're going to be healthier being on a bike. Children are a different issue because they don't have the same stability. They're smaller. That's another issue. When you get into these faster vehicles like the class 3 e-bikes, I can see that because the speeds are greater. The mopeds, the speeds are greater. But at the end of the day, you go to Europe, nobody wears a helmet, and they don't have it. And they don't, you go to Amsterdam, there's not a single rider wearing a helmet, and their numbers are pretty good. And their numbers are good not because the helmet, because their drivers are not killing them.
But I would say, I think a lot of European cities, they're just designed so differently.
That's it.
Narrow streets, cars are not driving as fast just to start with. And I think there's even a big difference probably between, Nassau, Suffolk, and the boroughs, a suburban area to the urban area. And I would say, like, when I did a search, micromobility and safety, first of all, you don't find many articles at all. And all of the articles you find are really, urban areas, not so much suburban areas. But I do think we will have an influx on Long Island, soon. We're getting there.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Donna. for
Thank
the
you.
question.
Any other, someone has their hand raised here, Sloan.
Hi, everybody. I think the information you have provided has been excellent. My name's Sloan. I'm the injury prevention coordinator over at Nassau University Medical Center, and I'm doing a lot of community outreach. And regarding the injuries, I know we can't truly quantify how all injuries occur, but I'm a firm component and believer of a helmet. Even pedestrians who fall, I teach them, protect your head first. Like the bones and the arms and the legs, they can break and they can be fixed, but once something happens to your brain, you might never be the same. So I agree with what you were saying, Dan, about the evidence-based research on that, but I strongly believe that helmets are just so important for our kids and things like that. And I hope in the future we can make a change and have more people wear helmets, because sometimes even just that little fall, I know what you were saying about the major, if someone's going 30 miles an hour, it's a different story.
Right.
But for those other situations, I think it's really important to preach the helmet.
Sure. And so let me just be clear. I am a proponent of helmets.
Okay.
The question, the question is whether or not they should be mandatory.
Yeah, I
That's-
get what you were saying.
Yeah. Like, and I'll be honest, when I take my kids to school on my cargo bike, I'm doing like 10 miles an hour. I don't wear a helmet. When I ride my road bike, I do. It's just my own psyche of why I think the circumstances are very, very different in my neighborhood at slow speed versus riding Northern Boulevard. But I'm on board about helmets, and I think they are there for a very good reason and serve a very good purpose.
Rosemary.
Hi, Brooke.
Hi.
Thanks for having this. It's a good thought-provoking discussion. As you guys know, because you're part of our coalition, The U.S. Green Building Council Sustainable Transportation Committee started this Let's Move Long Island initiative to try to promote active transportation, biking and cycling. As I've been, putting resources up, I try to balance the resources that do the promotion and the resources that teach safety, whether it's you guys in Rules of the Road or tick safety or, on trails and the like. This whole question of micromobility, one of the areas that we're exploring is what we need to integrate active transportation with transit. A lot of times, someone can't afford that station car to go down to the train, or and some of these micromobility solutions are attractive because you don't want to sweat on a bike when you get to the train station, or you might want to use a scooter. So we're exploring those and the applicability of them for Long Island. So as I kind of like the town hall aspect of it, to say, how can we work together so that we are, trying to achieve the benefits of this in all the forms, not just the traditional biking and walking, which needs a lot of safety aspects to make that safer too. But, some of the other case uses. I mean, one of our committee members, we just had a meeting this morning, took his e-bikes to Connecticut for this 60-mile trail. And he and his wife said they had a blast. It was just a pedal assist type bike, but as you're going along, it helps you along. And he saw, the applicability for that to Long Island in terms of economic development, kind of tourism with it. So I think we want to take advantage of these innovations, but figure out how we do it safely.
Yeah, and thanks, Rosemary. I had this one random thing I was going to mention. I didn't mention it, but there are foldable electric bikes. I don't know if Dan has come, Dan's big in the bike community. I don't know, in terms of Long Island, think if you could you had a foldable e-bike, you could ride it.
I don't think so, Mike, because I just saw one this past Sunday. We were Drive Electric Long Island, which I'm participating with too, was at the Huntington Environmental Festival. And one of our members brought his Honda Clarity and brought his foldable e-bike, and it's like 66 pounds. So I don't think that's something you're going to be taking up and down. It's foldable, but it's not like a folding bike that's very
a folding regular bike where you can take it. Okay, I didn't realize they were that heavy. Makes sense.
Yeah, when you see it, the battery itself is heavy, just in it, but it's they're much more clunky and
okay.
Yeah.
Well, Rosemary, just to get back to what you were talking about before, I had a question up on one of the last screens about where we would put routes that would benefit people who use these bikes, and how we should select the roads that they were put on. And I actually think that this is important, because I think that I don't want to say all roads lead to Rome, but basically they do. So just like all the major roads are east-west, and there are very few going north-south, if you have a train station that many people are traveling to as part of their daily routine, then I would look at those roads first as to how to make them much more easily accessible to people who would be able to use e-bikes, scooters, or whatever, have a place to park them and go back and forth, and use it as a pilot. Because if you could create a successful environment for these, and that where they're law abiding, where they could be, that the police would also supervise it, just to see that, even do a whole big event, check them when you're starting it. But I think it might be a way to successfully integrate these things into the environment, and without upsetting the whole world, and all the other drivers out there on the road who go crazy when they see a bike.
There actually is a pilot being planned now. A
Great.
kickoff meeting is happening next week with Baldwin. We're partnering with the Baldwin Civic and Vision Long Island to try to look at this integration of active transportation with transit. And it's not exclusively with micromobility. It's you know, it's absolutely looking at just
Right.
regular pedestrian and regular bicycles as well. But I would envision that that the micromobility options would be included in it.
Good.
Yeah. If you want my 2 cents, Rosemary, on that, I always look at Huntington. Huntington Village, the Huntington train station, it's a straight shot, 2 miles. It's right for that. I always look at that. There's so many apartments along the way that you can pick up. It's
Oh,
such a
yeah,
good
there's so
call.
many. It's
Yeah.
such a, you know, I mean, before I retired and now I just do this volunteering, I managed the Transit Solutions Program, which his mission was to promote transit to improve the air quality and reduce traffic congestion. And one of the issues is just access. And right now, we don't have the parking issues at the train station because of COVID, and most people, and a lot of people still working from home.
Right.
But you know, if you didn't get there to your train station, especially the Nassau County stations, by, you know, 7:30 in the morning, you couldn't even get there and park
Yeah.
if you had a car.
Yes.
So enabling, you know, more people to get access, whether it's through shuttles or through e-bikes or regular bikes or whatever, it could greatly reduce the number of cars on the road.
For sure. Is
Thank
Andy Morris on the call? I don't see him. He was going to join. He's got an e-bike touring company. He started this summer in the Hamptons.
Nice.
So and he keeps posting pictures, and it's a nice way to see the Hamptons outside of a car, or the vineyards outside of a car.
Well, they're perfect for there. I mean, the train comes in right into the middle of Hampton Bays and most of the other towns,
Yeah.
and you wouldn't need a car. That's why the bus was so successful going
Yeah.
out there.
All right.
But the e-bikes may not be perfect depending on how many vineyards you go to.
That's
True.
You heard my conversation with Suffolk County legislators, Mark. You were there for that.
You
And
know, what's interesting about that, about the law saying that they cannot be intoxicated on those bikes, who is going to stop them to see if they are? Or would it only be if they had a crash?
It would only be if I have a crash, and you know, so everybody knows my argument in front of the legislators. The laws are the same. So if you're driving drunk in a vehicle, you're driving drunk on a bike, it's the same penalty. So you want to, what's the point? You want to get, you know, at least you want to say, all right, if I ride my bike drunk, it's a ticket. Whereas you want to persuade them to get out of the car. And the bottom line is, if you're riding your bike drunk, the only person you're probably going to hurt is yourself, versus being behind the wheel of a 7,000-pound piece of steel. So I don't understand the mentality behind that. But that law, even though the county executive vetoed it, the legislator overturned his veto. So it's in effect.
All right. Are there any other questions?
Well, if you do think of a question after the fact, or if you're watching this recorded program, you can always feel free to reach out to either Cindy or myself. Both of our contact information is here. If you have a question for Dan or Mark, just send it our way and we'll make sure that it gets to their inbox. And we just have some additional resources for you here. The Walk Safe Long Island website is where you can find all upcoming events like this one. The New York State Governor's Traffic Safety Committee website. The New York State Department of Transportation has a lot of good info about biking in New York. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, another great website. The Institute for Traffic Safety and Research has a lot of good crash data if that's something you're interested in learning more about. The New York Bicycling Coalition. Thank you, Dan, for that great addition to our list here. And the Micromobility newsletter that Mark had discussed is another really good resource for more information related to what was discussed tonight.
You know, Brooke, I might also add, and we didn't put it up here,
Yes.
but AAA also has a great deal of information, particularly on bicycle safety.
We will certainly have to add that for future presentations. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Cindy. And that could be AAA.com/safety. You'll get into our safety pages.
There is one question in the chat. Where can we find the vehicle and traffic laws regarding the e-vehicles?
Okay. It's in the New York State Vehicle and Traffic Law. It is part 20, You ready for this? The session law is 7508-B. And then the assembly is 9508B. And then it is intertwined within the vehicle and traffic law. So for example, like they amended VTL 102, which defined bicycles. They had a part C. So I need to put together a pretty good list of the stuff. I've done it some other things. I don't have a short list for you, but it's all basically intertwined within the vehicle and traffic law. So anywhere you would see a section that you think would apply to like to where bikes can be ridden 1234, it's amended in there now and has the additional section as to dealing with e-bikes. Motor vehicles was amended, VTL 125, to exclude e-bikes. Unfortunately, it's not a nice, concise list. Maybe that's a project for me one day, but
Dan, there was just a question, which I think I know the answer. I'll give it to you. VTL, is it online? Like these?
yeah, it is.
But and it would have even, because this law is fairly current. Like I have no printed copy, but you know, it wouldn't have this new stuff.
No, you know what? If
Right.
you want to email me, I could say I have a printed copy of the law and highlighted the changes. That might be a good reference. I could drop my email into the chat.
I was just going to ask if you could please do that. Great.
And I wonder if, I don't know, I thought I saw the name Richard. I don't know if he was a police officer, if he asked that question. If he is, if he's still around, I was wondering what department he's with.
You're still there, right, Richard?
Yeah, Freeport.
Maybe we could do some training for the police department if you're interested.
Yeah, Richard, I'll make a plug. NYBC has GTSD grant money to do law enforcement training. We've been trying to find some departments to do it. I know Floral Park is interested. Trying to get Glen Cove to do it, but it's basically bike training. New York state laws that apply to both motorists and cyclists. So if it's something your department is interested in, we have the funding and the availability and a trainer to bring out to your department to do it. I think it's one day. And we also have some roll call stuff too, short stuff.
How would we find out more information regarding it?
You can email me. I put the email into the chat. And it's just, I don't know if you can see it, dflanzig@flanziglaw.com.
You know, I'm not seeing it in the
Right.
chat,
Oh,
actually.
maybe, you know what? I know I did it to, hold on, I didn't do it to everyone.
Great, thank you. All right,
And I
well,
want to thank
thank you.
everybody who attended. I'm so
Yes.
happy that we were able to share this information because I really believe that this is really the future. And we're going to see a lot more of these. And, you know, I don't want to see anybody getting hurt unnecessarily. And I mean, or even necessarily, but, you know, it requires planning. So if we could just think ahead, maybe we could plan for an orderly integration of these vehicles.
And thank you
Richard,
to our
you want-
panel.
Yeah, Richard, you want to give me your number, Freeport? I can give you a call too.
Sure. 631-599-9098. That's my cell. I'm the
Okay.
sergeant in charge of the traffic unit here.
Oh, awesome. Great. All right. I'll give you a call tomorrow.
Great, sounds good, thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
All right, well, thank you all very much.
All right,
Thank
all
you,
for
Brooke.
attending.
Good night, thank you.
Good night. Good night, everybody.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Good to
Say
see you
goodnight,
guys. Bye-bye.
Take care, Dan.
Bye-bye.
That would be Cindy's. All right. All right,
Why are they
take
up so
care.
late?
I know, they're getting ready for bed. All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Good
night.
night.